They sat in my living room like vultures, cold smiles, stiff suits, fake sympathy. I was still reeling from the funeral, barely able to breathe through the haze of grief, and yet there they were. My late husband's family, the same people who had never accepted me, never truly welcomed me into their world, were already circling. "Of course, we're just here to help," his sister said, her voice syrupy and false. Help? I should have known better. That day marked the start of the real nightmare. Not the sudden heart attack that stole Mark from me in a blink. Not the sleepless nights or the ache of loss. But this. The betrayal. The blindsiding injustice. His family was about to try to take everything from me. The home Mark and I built over 15 years of marriage. The home where I raised our daughter. The place I planted roses in the backyard for our anniversary. The place we hosted barbecues. Made memories, shared dreams. They wanted to tear it from me like it meant nothing. And the worst part? They acted like it was their right. Mark's mother, Lydia, looked me straight in the eye, folded her hands on the kitchen table, and said with disturbing calm, "Now. That Mark is gone. It's only fair we discuss what happens to the property." Fair? I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. "What do you mean, what happens to the property? This is my home." She didn't blink. It was Mark's name on the deed, wasn't it? My blood went cold. They knew. They had checked. They had come prepared. Yes, the house had only Mark's name on the deed. We had bought it before we married, and though he always said we'd change that someday, we just never got around to it. We were too busy living. We trusted each other. I trusted him. And now he was gone, and they were here. And they wanted my home. They didn't even wait a week after the funeral before trying to get me to sign things I didn't understand. Legal-looking documents they slid across the table like they were doing me a favor. I didn't sign, of course. My instincts screamed not to, but I could feel the walls closing in. Mark was gone. His will? Nowhere to be found. They claimed Temmuz Sayed hadn't updated it in years. They said it left everything to his next of kin. And in their minds, I wasn't family. I was just the woman who married their golden boy and, to them, didn't belong in the world he came from. I was stunned. Lost, alone, but not stupid. I didn't cry in front of them, not then. But after they left, after I locked the door and leaned my back against it, I slid down to the floor and let the sobs take over. I felt everything crash around me. Grief, betrayal, fear. They thought they could bully me, exploit my grief, and walk away with the roof over my head. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because underneath the heartbreak, a fire had started to smolder. They thought I was weak. They mistook my silence for surrender, but I was going to fight, and I was going to win. In the days that followed, I began to see the full picture, and it was uglier than I ever imagined. The calls started first. Lydia, Mark's mother, constantly checking in. Each conversation felt like a veiled threat cloaked in civility. "We just want to make sure everything is handled properly," she'd say. "It would be best for everyone if we settle the estate quietly." Quietly, meaning quickly, before I figured out what they were really doing. Next came the letter. Thick envelope, expensive stationery, from their attorney. They were officially contesting ownership of the house. They claimed in writing that since Mark's name was the only one on the deed, and since his most recent will was allegedly incomplete and unsigned, the house now legally belonged to the estate, not me. And since they were his blood relatives, they were the rightful beneficiaries. I read that letter 3 times. My hands trembled, but I kept reading. I needed to understand what I was up against. Apparently, they had already filed paperwork with the county to initiate probate proceedings. They hadn't wasted a second. I realized they'd probably been planning this before Mark's body was even cold. Worse, they were confident, so confident that they had started making calls to real estate agents. One even left a card at my doorstep. Lydia had begun telling neighbors that the family would be selling soon. They were acting like it was a done deal. I felt sick, violated. This wasn't just about a house. This was about the life Mark and I had built together. The promises, the sacrifices, everything we shared, reduced to a transaction they were eager to cash in on. I started questioning everything. Why hadn't we updated the deed? Why hadn't Mark finalized his new will? I knew we'd talked about it, especially after our daughter was born. But life got busy, and he was always optimistic. "We've got time," he said. He was wrong. And now I was staring down the barrel of being evicted from my own home. What stung most was knowing how much they hated me. They'd never accepted that Mark had married someone beneath their standards. I didn't come from money. I didn't have a polished pedigree. I was just a woman who loved him fiercely and completely, and that was never enough for them. I could still remember the way his sister sneered the night Mark introduced me at a family dinner. "She's different," she'd said, as if I were some sort of curiosity. Over the years, I tried to win them over. Polite smiles, holiday gifts, family functions. I bent over backward. But no matter what I did, I was always just the wife, never truly one of them. Now that he was gone, they were treating me like disposable baggage. They underestimated me. But I won't lie. At that moment, I was terrified. I had no will. No deed in my name, no savings to afford a legal war, and they had money, lawyers, and connections. I felt powerless. But then something clicked. Fear turned to anger, and anger gave way to clarity. They were assuming I'd fold, that I'd crumble. Under the pressure, sign whatever they put in front of me, and walk away quietly. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how far a woman will go when she's fighting not just for a house, but for dignity, legacy, and justice. I didn't have their wealth. I didn't have their name. But I had something far more dangerous. I had nothing left to lose. And that's when the idea came. If they wanted to play legal games, I'd play smarter. I didn't need to fight them head-on with brute force. I just needed one document, one piece of truth, that would shut them down completely. I was going to find it, and when I did, they wouldn't know what hit them. It wasn't just a house. It was my daughter's childhood. It was her nursery that Mark painted himself, crooked trim and all. It was the kitchen where she took her first steps, holding onto the cabinets, squealing with laughter. It was the wall in the hallway where we marked her height every year with a black Sharpie, a living, growing timeline of our family. And now they wanted to erase all of that, like we were nothing. I watched my daughter sleeping one night, curled, up in a blanket that still smelled faintly of Mark's cologne, and I knew I couldn't let them win. Not for my sake, but for hers. She had just lost her father. She couldn't lose her home, too. They didn't care about her, not really. They didn't call to check on her, didn't ask how she was coping. All they cared about was property, assets, what's fair. But fairness doesn't mean anything when it's rooted in greed. If I lost this house, we would have nowhere to go. I'd been working part-time since our daughter was born, relying on Mark's income while I managed the home and cared for her. That was the deal we made. I'd sacrificed promotions, professional growth, all with the understanding that our life was a shared effort. But now that trust had left me exposed, and they were using it against me. I started researching probate, law, property rights, widow entitlements, anything I could get my hands on. I barely slept. I stayed up at night reading legal forums and watching videos of estate attorneys. I spoke to anyone who would take my calls. That's when I learned just how vulnerable my situation really was. In many states, if a spouse dies without a will and the home is only in their name, the surviving spouse may not automatically inherit everything. Some states divide assets between the spouse and other legal heirs, parents, siblings, even adult, children from previous marriages. And Mark? He had never legally added me to the deed. His family knew that. I realized then, they weren't just opportunists. They had done their homework. This was calculated. But knowledge cuts both ways. The deeper I dug, the more I began to realize that their case wasn't airtight. There were provisions, exceptions, and if I could find something, anything, that proved Mark intended for this house to remain mine, it could change everything. Then came the memory. It hit me randomly while folding laundry. Mark had refinanced the house about 2 years ago. He was proud of getting a lower interest rate. We had signed some documents at the kitchen table. I didn't pay much attention at the time. He said it was routine, but I remembered asking, should I be signing something too? He'd smiled and said, no, just you living here is enough. It's our home. Always will be. Was there a record of that? Could that refinancing paperwork include something, anything that mentioned my name? I felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was enough. Because this fight wasn't just about brick and wood. It was about proving that my husband's love didn't end with his life, that our life meant something, that our daughter wouldn't grow up thinking everything her parents built could be stolen with a legal loophole. I couldn't let that happen. Mark may have made mistakes, like not updating his will, but I knew the man I married. He would have never wanted his family to throw his wife and daughter onto the street. That wasn't him. This house was our legacy, and I was going to protect it. So I gathered every document I could find: tax forms, bank statements, closing disclosures, anything with his signature, my name, or a mention of our home. I didn't have a law degree, but I had something more dangerous than a team of lawyers. I had purpose, and I was about to uncover the one document that would tear their entire scheme apart. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was preparing for war. I began organizing everything. Paperwork took over the kitchen table: sorted piles, color-coded tabs, notes scribbled in the margins, bank statements, insurance policies, letters from the mortgage company, even old emails Mark and I exchanged about the house. Every scrap of information could be a clue. But I kept coming back to that one thing: his refinance. I knew there had to be a paper trail. Mortgage lenders keep detailed documentation. If Mark refinanced, there had to be disclosures, updated agreements, perhaps even a beneficiary declaration. And if he listed me anywhere on that paperwork, as cohabitant, co-owner, or emergency contact, I could use it. So I called the mortgage company. I was polite but persistent. My husband passed recently. I believe he refinanced the mortgage through your company 2 years ago, and I'm trying to get a full copy of the documents. The woman on the phone was hesitant, asking if I had power of attorney or executor rights. I didn't. But I explained I was his wife and living in the home, that I believed my name might be listed in the file. "I'm sorry, but we'll need a formal request," she said. "Do you have access to his email or client portal?" I did. Mark had always been terrible at remembering passwords, but he'd used the same few variations for everything. I guessed the correct one on my third try. And there it was, an email confirmation from the mortgage company dated 22 months ago. Attached was the full loan packet. My heart raced as I opened the PDF and began to scan the pages. For 20 minutes, I found nothing. And then, on page 17 of the 43-page document, I saw it. A section labeled Occupancy Statement and Spousal Acknowledgement. Under that, in clear black text, borrower affirms that primary residence is shared with spouse, my full name, who resides at the property and has joint survivorship rights should the borrower become deceased prior to full payment of loan. My hands trembled. It wasn't a full deed, but it was a legal acknowledgement, from him, on record, that I was not just living in the home, but entitled to survivorship, my name, in his handwriting, in a legally binding document. It wasn't just sentimental proof, it was leverage. I printed 3 copies and put them in protective sleeves. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I scheduled a consultation with a probate attorney, not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in spousal property disputes. I told her everything. She reviewed the document and leaned back with a slow smile. "This changes things," she said. She explained that even if the will was outdated or missing, that occupancy clause in a financial contract could be used to prove intent, especially since it was signed and dated far more recently than any will on file. She also mentioned that Mark's acknowledgement of our joint residence and my survivorship rights would be hard for a court to ignore. "Would it hold up?" I asked. "In my opinion?" She nodded. "It'll shut them down before this ever reaches a judge, if we play it right." And that's when the real plan formed. I wasn't going to wait for court. I wasn't going to let them drag me through weeks or months of threats and filings. No, I was going to hit them where it hurt, their arrogance. So we drafted a formal response to their probate claim. My lawyer attached the occupancy document, a sworn affidavit, and a statement that if they proceeded further, we would pursue legal action for harassment, attempted displacement, and willful misrepresentation of property claims. And then I sent a personal email to Lydia. No lawyers. Just me and her. I attached the document with a single sentence. "You came to take what wasn't yours, but Mark made sure it would always be mine." I hit send and waited. Because now the chessboard was set, and I was finally making the first real move. The silence from Lydia was almost deafening. For 3 days, nothing. No emails, no phone calls, no text messages, just quiet. But then, like clockwork, the retreat began. First, the real estate agent, who had visited my home earlier and left a business card, sent me an apologetic email. "I've been advised to withdraw from any representation concerning the property at my address. Wishing you the best. No explanation. Just gone. Next, the probate attorney representing Lydia and her family called my lawyer. Their tone had shifted completely, polite, measured, suddenly full of misunderstandings and regret. They claimed their clients had not intended to create distress, that this was simply a procedural error during a confusing time. They asked if we'd be willing to resolve things amicably and avoid court. The audacity of it made me want to scream. They weren't sorry. They were scared, because they had finally realized they couldn't win. The document Mark signed wasn't just a form, it was a legal shield. In the eyes of the court, it showed he had designated me as the person he intended to live in and inherit the house. It didn't matter if my name wasn't on the original deed, his intent was crystal clear. And in cases like mine, intent matters. My lawyer explained how, if they continued to push, we could file a petition to have the house transferred into my name through spousal survivorship, a process that, while slow, would be upheld under the law due to the language Mark used in the refinancing paperwork. That document had saved me. But beyond the legalities, this entire ordeal taught me something I wish I'd understood sooner. Never leave your life in someone else's hands, even if that someone is the person you love most in the world. So I got to work on more than just defense. I went to the county clerk and began the process of legally transferring the property into my name. With my lawyer's help, we filed everything: death certificates, the occupancy agreement, the survivorship petition, and the response to the probate claim. I also had the house appraised, updated the homeowner's insurance policy, and met with an estate planner to draft a new will, this time with my daughter's name protected in black and white. Everything was now in writing in legal terms with backups and digital copies. No more gray areas. No more loose ends. They would never get a second chance to pull this on me, or my daughter. And I realized other people needed to know this too. So here's what I would tell anyone reading this and feeling even the slightest echo of my experience. Add your name to the deed, now. Even if you trust your spouse, even if it feels unnecessary. If your name isn't on the property, legally, you're vulnerable. Update your wills, regularly. Life changes, jobs, kids, health. Keep your wills and estate plans current, or someone else might try to write your future for you. Know your rights. There are protections for surviving spouses, but they vary by state and depend on what's documented. Learn your local laws before you ever need to rely on them. Keep records. Save emails, refinance documents, insurance policies, anything that reflects ownership, intent, or shared assets. Don't be afraid to fight. Bullies thrive on silence and fear. But the moment you stand up and show them you're informed and ready, they fold. Lydia and her clan never apologized, not truly. But they backed down, pulled their filings, and disappeared like cowards once they realized the tide had turned. And as I stood in my now legally secured home, looking out the window at the rosebush Mark planted for our 10th anniversary, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Peace. They tried to take my home. They tried to erase my place in his life. But Mark left a trace. And that trace was all I needed. I didn't expect to see Lydia again. After their silent retreat, I assumed they'd quietly lick their wounds and disappear. But she showed up one last time. It was a gray morning, the kind that still feels like winter's breath, even in spring. I heard the knock while I was making tea, and when I opened the door, there she was, wrapped in a tailored coat, standing on my porch like a ghost from a past I no longer feared. "Can we talk?" she asked. I said nothing, just stepped aside and let her in. She walked through the hallway slowly, like she was seeing the place for the first time. Her eyes lingered on the family photos. Me, Mark, our daughter. Happy, real. "I loved my son," she said softly once we sat at the table. "And I still think he made a mistake. Marrying you." I blinked but didn't flinch. She couldn't help herself, even now. "But he clearly loved you. And you were right to fight for this house. He would have wanted that." There it was. Not quite an apology, not quite approval, but something close enough. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper and slid it across the table. "We've withdrawn all probate claims, officially." I stared at it for a moment. I already knew it was coming. My lawyer had informed me the day before, but something about seeing it in her hands, seeing her forced to deliver it in person, brought a strange kind of closure. "I hope you take care of the place," she added, rising to leave. I always have, I replied. She looked at me, really looked, for the first time. There was no warmth in her gaze, but there was something else, recognition. She had lost, and she knew it. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, just like I had the day they first tried to take everything from me. But this time I didn't sink to the floor. I stood tall, because I had won. Not just the legal battle, but the war for my future. The house was now legally in my name. My daughter's home, our memories, our life. Safe. The paperwork was done, the legal drama over, the vultures had flown off, empty-handed, and something else had changed too. Me. I wasn't the woman I had been at the start of this story. Grieving, blindsided, lost. I had faced betrayal from the people who should have stood beside me in my darkest hour. And I didn't crumble. I rose. I fought. And I learned that being underestimated can be the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. Because no one sees you coming. Mark's family thought I'd be easy to erase. But they didn't understand that love doesn't vanish just because someone dies. It leaves fingerprints, footprints, documents, proof. And justice. Now the house is filled with warmth again. My daughter laughs in the hallway where her growth chart still marks each passing year. I've framed the document that saved us, not out of spite, but as a reminder of how fragile everything can feel, and how strong we really are. I've also made it my mission to help other women, widows, wives, partners, who found themselves in similar battles. I've joined online support groups, shared my story, and spoken up about financial literacy and estate planning. Because silence is the soil where injustice grows. They came for my home, thinking they could bulldoze me with grief. But I found my strength in the rubble, and I made sure they walked away with nothing. Karma? Maybe. Justice? Absolutely. Because, in the end, they didn't just lose a legal fight, they lost the illusion of control. And I got everything I needed. My home, my daughter's future, and my power.